all that baggage that we packed on this trip called life. Some of which, in our defense, we didn't pick up at the train station. It just kind of showed up, and now we're stuck moving it onto the train.
It's so subtle that by the time that we're practicing it, we don't even realize that it was for our luggage, like you said, luggage. It's like all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's who I am. So going back to the question of like looking ourselves in the mirror and going like, who is that person? I mean, that's what happens. You have children and you start doing the caregiving because that's what you do as a mom, but then you kind of find yourself doing most of it. There's a lot of negotiating, but even when they're understanding, because I have a very understanding partner, it still was a lot of pushing and a lot of like renegotiating and, arguing just to get them to take more of the load because they're not taught that that's something they're supposed to do.
Right. Because they've been conditioned as well. Welcome to Drinks with the Girls, conversations for women over 40 around connection, change, and the power of female friendship. Living well with stories to tell. I'm Karen, and this is Lisa.
We are moms and solopreneurs stepping into our own, diving into real conversations about things that matter to women in midlife.
We're here to spill the tea on everything that affects women in their 40s and beyond. Topics like loss and grief, changing relationships, launching kids, menopause, and reinventing ourselves in midlife. We are here to tackle it all.
Connect with us through a blend of our lived experiences, our friendship, the memory of our moms, plus a collection of real stories, honest conversations, and engaging interviews that will make women over 40 feel seen and remind them that they're not alone on this journey called life. Let's go.
Welcome back to another episode of Drinks with the Girls. I am so excited you are here, listeners, because this is going to be an amazing episode. I'm going to give you the little disclaimer. I think it might be a little heavy, and also it's something that is so important, and I think you're going to definitely get some good takeaways that are going to affect your life. But before we dive in, I am drinking a Soleil. What flavor is it? Berry flavor sparkling water.
Very nice.
Lisa,
nice.
what you drinking, girl?
I'm double fisting. I've got Arbonne Fizz and a Mind Health, but I'm kind of obsessed with my sparkle hops. That's been like my go-to. I found a store that sells like a bunch of different like adaptogens. So it is my pleasure. I will ask her what she's drinking in a minute to introduce one of my besties. I've known her forever. Our kids were in diapers together, and she is an incredible expert on many things, but on the subject we're going to be talking about today, she has both lived and studied it, and I have gone to her for lots of advice on this topic over the years. So I would like to introduce my amazing friend, Alex Casillas, and she is here to join us. She's going to introduce herself a little bit and tell us what she's drinking.
Oh, hi, I'm Alex. Let's start with what I'm drinking. I'm drinking some hibiscus tea. I wish it was more exciting than that, but it's good and it helps with my digestion. So I like drinking it.
Oh, is it good for digestion? I didn't know that.
Yeah. Good for digestion and for like cleaning you out. And yeah, it's really nice. It's a really good drink.
I'll have to incorporate that.
It's refreshing. So I like it in the summer. So yeah. So keeping it nice and refreshing. Let's see a little bit about myself. So I just started my own private practice. And I'm really excited about that. It's called Con Corazon Mental Health Services, and translation, that means with heart mental health services. And the reason why I called it that is because I wanted it to be intentional for people to know that I wasn't your average therapist that you're just kind of here to reflect back on and be quote unquote a mirror. That like I was a whole person, and that when you work with me, like I put my whole self in it too. So that's why I called it what I called it. I work primarily with BIPOC folks. I love working with survivors of both domestic violence and sexual assault. It's something that I've been doing for many years, and one of the reasons why I went back to school to get a master's in social work. So yeah, I like working with trauma, and I get it, I guess.
And thank you so much for what you do, Alex, because I'm sitting here and I'm listening to you say, I love what I do. I love working with trauma. And that sounds kind of alarming at first, but thank goodness there are people like you that know what they're doing and And I'm imagining you have to have some of your own boundaries and whatnot, in order to work with this topic. But we can talk about that a little bit later. But thank you for what you do. And congratulations on your office opening. That is super exciting.
Yes.
So let's just dive in. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right. So the first thing I want to know is, I feel like as Gen X women, most of our listeners are in midlife, probably all of them. We are so good at survival mode. And we are so good at just pushing it all down, put your head down, power through, keep it together. Do you feel like this is trauma related?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Like,
Explore that, please, for us.
it's totally. Well, I mean, first of all, like I want to kind of talk a little bit about the nervous system, because I think trauma has a really bad rep, and I mean, it's definitely not something pleasing, but it's not necessarily something bad that, how we react to it. Survival mode, or, the survival mechanism is something that we developed through evolution, so it's there to protect us. It's there to make sure that we survive. So, I had a client once tell me, when I asked, like, oh, how do you deal with difficult situations? Their response was like, oh, I dissociate. And I started giggling, because I was like, oh, that's a lot of awareness there. I'm like, but dissociation is not a bad thing, because it helps us survive whatever situation we went through, right? So I just wanted to kind of mention that what we do to survive is important. Like, it's not a bad thing. Now, when it gets to the area where it's not serving us, is when it becomes like the default mode, right? And it's also triggered by something very small that doesn't rise to the level of, like, we're in danger. And when we in our society, when things like stress, like, oh, I have a deadline, for example, sometimes triggers that same survival mechanism. And let's face it, if we miss a deadline, we're not going to die. We might, not get paid on time, or someone's going to be unhappy, but it's not going to kill us, right? But if our nervous system is so dysregulated that it doesn't know how to distinguish from, like, an actual, like, near death experience to, a deadline, then that's when we enter, like, problematic area, right? Because it doesn't feel good to be feeling all those symptoms associated, with stress, or that response.
So maybe I jumped the gun there a little bit. So
Yep.
maybe can you give just like a basic definition of trauma? And, also I think now with the internet, with social media and stuff, you hear a lot more about like trauma responses, trauma informed, and things like that. So can you just kind of touch on those things a little bit for everybody?
I roll my eyes a lot when I hear a lot of, or see a lot of things on the internet.
I bet.
Sometimes some folks get it right, but I roll my eyes a lot. So trauma is not an actual, like, it's not like a certain event. It's how we respond to a certain event. Because two people can have the same event happen to them and have completely different responses. So if someone, for example, who is well regulated and was brought up in a very safe, loving home with people that care about them, experiences, like, let's say, a fire, an earthquake, and the person who grew up in an environment that wasn't very loving and caring, they're going to have a completely different response to that fire, right? Earthquake. The person that had more support is probably going to, not feel great, but walk away from it, and be able to readjust and self-regulate a lot better than the person who did not have that safety growing up. They're probably going to still be experiencing a lot of those symptoms, like, like hypervigilance, or, nervousness, or, heart palpitations, like, for a while, because they don't know how to self-regulate as well as the other person. So trauma, like I said, it's not necessarily a specific thing. It's more how we respond to that thing. And that goes really back to how we're brought up. So, like, when you mentioned the Gen X folks, the first thing that came to mind is, like, we were brought up by boomers, right? Our boomer parents, I'm try to say it as nicely as possible, kind of sucked when it came to, like, teaching us how to feel, right?
Feeling?
Yeah, feelings. What are those? You're right. So,
Mhm.
we weren't really taught to feel our feelings and to feel safe, because it was not safe. So we weren't really taught how to self-regulate. And we are not born with that knowledge. That's why when a baby cries, you pick it up and you rock it and you try to soothe it because the baby does not know how to self-regulate. And a lot of our parents believed in the crying out method. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So a lot of us were brought up, as babies with like, cry it out. What happens to the baby that cries and cries and doesn't get its needs met? It dissociates, shuts down, or it just doesn't learn how to regulate.
Can you give a definition of dissociate for the listeners?
So dissociation, I've had people describe it as kind of like a dream state or like kind of observing yourself from like a window, like looking in, and you can still see what you're doing and you can kind of experience it, but you feel very detached from your body. So it's kind of like floating above yourself and watching what you're doing, but not really feeling it through your body.
Yeah. You just kind of go.
So when I think of dissociation, I think I associate it with sexual abuse trauma.
Yes.
So are there other also, it sounds like there's also other things that cause people to dissociate as well, not just something extreme like that.
So to understand dissociation, we have to look at the freeze response. So the freeze response was the first response that we acquired, through evolution. So, I mean, you've probably heard of like the reptilian brain. So that's like the amygdala, which is somewhere back here. The first line of defense that reptiles, like, I guess, learned or obtained or whatever through evolution was to freeze. Because what happens when you freeze? You look dead, right? A predator is not going to eat you because they're like, oh, I'm not going to eat that dead looking thing because who knows how long it's been dead and I don't want to die, so they it's a very powerful survival mechanism, the freeze response. So that's usually like the first line of defense whenever you're something bad happens, like that needs our survival mechanism to go online. That's one of the first things that comes up. If the other ones don't work, like fighting or fleeing or appeasing somebody else don't work, we go back to freeze because that's like the most powerful one. So we shut down. Freeze can look anywhere from like literally daydreaming and like, just like a kid who's in class and completely daydreaming and not paying attention to the teacher, can look from that to like literally passing out. So it's a wide range. Sexual assault is definitely a reason for someone to go into freeze response because if you think about it, sometimes there's no way out. There's no way of fighting. There's no way of like appeasing. So your body does what it can do to make sure that you survive that incident. So freeze, dissociation is definitely something that people do. But dissociation happens a lot, especially with folks who have early childhood trauma. Because if you think about it, a child does not have the capacity to fight or flee or even appease their parents, because usually the trauma comes from the parent. So freeze response or dissociation is very common with our early childhood experiences.
I'm picturing somebody that is listening to this going, I totally get this, for people that are victims of domestic violence or sexual assault or had these huge traumas. But, my childhood wasn't that bad. Like, I don't have trauma. Like what's the big deal? Right. And I've heard that, like, my daughter said that to me and it's a dissociative kind of way to look at it. But can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think people think trauma has to be trauma with a big fat T.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I mentioned in the definition that it's not the event. It's how we respond to it. One of the diagnoses that is not included and I'll circle back to this in the DSM-5 is complex PTSD. Why? Because it's a lot of little T's. Complex PTSD is a lot of little T's. What does that mean? It's cumulative, right? So a lot of events. So for example, if you have a child that grew up in a war zone, or not even, actually, that's a big T. Let's talk about a poor neighborhood. Let's say poverty, right? Poverty is traumatic. So if you grow up in an environment where you don't have food security or even like housing security, so that's cumulative. It might not be like a big thing, but it's a bunch of little things that are happening. Or if you grow up in a home where your father or mother are not really available to you to support you, that they don't give you like the kind of love that you need. So, it turns out to be neglectful. So it might not be like a bunch of big things, but if it's a bunch of little things, that ends up having an impact. Because if when we're talking about children, like they're not able to self-regulate. Like that's why I wanted to mention that at the beginning. Like they need to be taught. That's why when you have like a 2-year-old that throws a tantrum, right? They start screaming, and they have a hard time like calming down, like that's why you have to kind of walk them through it or sit with them, and try to help them calm down. Like now that I'm older and I've learned all this stuff, I realize that like timeouts are horrible for kids, right? You shouldn't really do that because you're actually making them feel bad or they're having their big emotions when you should kind of guide them through those big emotions until they calm down. So things like that, even though, yeah, you had supportive parents, but let's say that their discipline wasn't really good, that can cause us to not be very well regulated. So then when we experience certain stressors later on in life, we're not equipped to manage them.
So great, Alex. Now I just envision my kids who are both in their late 20s on the therapist's couch because of all the timeouts I put them in.
My name is Karen Shatafian, and I am a shameless coffee addict and empowerment coach for women, and my love language is authenticity. My mission is helping women unapologetically design a life they're in love with. Because what the hell are we waiting for? My website, KarenShatafian.com, has all my coaching packages and free offers like my Midlife Reclamation Guide. In it, you'll find tools to help you decide how to create the most inspired and empowered version of yourself and your life. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram talking about ways women can show up for themselves after decades of showing up for everyone else. Join me as we throw off the shackles and live our best freaking lives. See the show notes for all the details. Cheers.
So, I mean, there's just no way that we can ever be perfect parents, and hey, my kids are going to be on the therapy couch too. Like, they have issues.
I feel like it's progress if we don't screw them up in the way we were screwed up. Like,
yeah.
That to me, that's like
you screw them up in different ways.
Exactly. I agree. That's actually what my best friend told me once, because I called her once and I was freaking out because I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. And she's like, look, Alex, just get over the fact that you're not going to screw up your kids because you are. It's just, as long as you screwed up the way you were, you're fine. And I'm like, okay, progress. So, progress.
So, back to kind of the woman that's listening to this going, well, I didn't have any big trauma. Like, what is that? Da, da, da. What would you say are some telltale signs? Because like, for example, with my daughter, right? Like we really had to identify like what it was. And she's like, that's trauma, right? So can you give people some like signs that might indicate that they're reacting to trauma, right? Like if a reaction is kind of off, like, can you kind of just give us a window into that?
I mean, I would say if you find yourself angry all the time, having mood swings, if like little things set you off, you might want to kind of look and see what's going on there. Someone, cutting you off in traffic should not set you off. That's a small thing. Having a deadline should not feel like, you're about to have a heart attack. These are kind of telltale signs that my nervous system isn't regulated, and you have to ask yourself why that is. Because someone who's well adjusted and whose nervous system is regulated, I mean, if somebody cuts me off, I'll be like, oh, that sucks. But I'm not going to want to like run them over with my car or, do something crazy like that. Or if, something happens, I'm not going to get like something small, like let's say, I don't know, my coffee was cold. Like I'm not going to start yelling at someone for it, so just have to kind of check with yourself. Like, if my reaction is proportional to the actual thing that's happening in front of me? Because if it's not, then you need to really start questioning how, why that is. And I mean, there's so many symptoms. It's kind of hard to kind of go through all of that. But that's why I say, like, if if you're not reacting proportionally to the thing that's happening in front of you, you need to start questioning to whether you need some support.
And I feel like on the whole, like generically, stereotypically, men tend to react like outwardly anger wise, and women tend to react by disassociating and just shutting themselves up.
Yeah.
Not in every case, but that seems to be kind of the stereotype.
Although we're also a lot more anxious to women. Anxiety is really, really high with women. Anxiety and depression is like almost double than men. But I feel like those statistics are not very accurate because also men don't seek support as often as women do, which is why we live longer. But
It's true.
because it's important. It's true. But yeah, there's definitely more, it's more acceptable and acceptable, quote unquote, for men to externalize it and be more aggressive than for women. And so we tend to mostly internalize it and usually comes out in anxiety and depression.
So, Alex, we talk a lot about women who get to their 40s and 50s and who kind of feel like they're living somebody else's life, or they've, like, I work with clients and it's like they look in the mirror and they don't recognize themselves. So, where does that loss of self come from? And is it trauma related?
Oh man, well, first of all, I believe almost everything is trauma related, and I think that all of us have some sort of trauma, whether it's little T or big T, especially in our capitalist society. Just going to put that out there. Capitalist, patriarchal, all those things are bad.
Oh, goody.
Bad.
Love bashing the patriarchy. Now you're talking our language.
So I think a lot of it has to do with the way society, so many things, obviously trauma, as I mentioned, but the way society views women and the expectations that it has on us. By the time we reach our 40s, most of our kids are either teenagers or older. And so we kind of have a little bit of a room to really look at ourselves in the mirror, which we didn't have before. And that's when we realized, like, oh, I've put my life on pause to take care of all these other people. Who the hell am I? And that's when a lot of things start to come out. And it doesn't help that it's also like a period in our lives where our hormones are changing. And a drop in estrogen is actually believed to affect our moods like big time, like make us more susceptible to like symptoms of depression and anxiety. So if that estrogen drop really opens a huge door.
So we have all these different areas, all these different things that are going on in our life. It's like the perfect storm. Would you say?
Yeah.
When we get to this stage in life, there's all these things, that are like compounding on each other. And so it's no wonder we get to this point and we're just like, what is going on? Something needs to change.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's just a lot of different things that are kind of coming together, exactly that to create the perfect storm. And, I've definitely gone through mine. It's still going through it. And I'm really grateful because I've let go of a lot of things that no longer serve me. And I think it's this, and it depends on how you look at it. It could be a really shitty time because, everything is kind of colliding and you can't find the way out, or it can be an opportunity to really let go of things that no longer serve us and to really reclaim like who we are and really like, put that forward and get the help that we need because we can't do this by ourselves. We just can't. It's impossible.
So I want to talk a little bit more about all that baggage that we packed on this trip called life. Some of which, in our defense, we didn't pick up at the train station. It just kind of showed up and now we're stuck moving it onto the train, right? So I think of identities, like we talk a lot about the good girl on this podcast, or the helper or the achiever, right? That was me growing up. Some people never outgrow those roles. And in midlife, they're going, what the heck's going on? So we did a big episode on that whole good girl role. What is your feeling about that? And what do you see in your practice typically as far as, identities that have been forced on people that they're trying to shed, women in particular?
Yeah. And for sure, I see it more with women. That is very true. And I also have mostly women clients. I see a lot of like the helper and the overachiever. Definitely, those are the two big ones that I see a lot. Sometimes both at the same time with the same person. A lot of that is also cultural because I do work with a lot of BIPOC folks. So there's small nuances with different cultures, but they all kind of agree on that the women have to be either helpers or overachievers to try to kind of carve a path for themselves, a seat at the table, however you want to call it. And that there's a lot of guilt and shame attached to all those identities. So in some ways, like it's funny because a lot of people believe that that's who they are. They have a hard time like seeing that that's been kind of imposed, that it's a societal expectation. So kind of teasing those two and separating those two can be very, very difficult. And like someone like me, like the helper and also overachiever was put on me growing up. I've 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 let go of both, but I also realize I do enjoy helping people. It does bring me joy. I've made a very clear distinction between doing that as a profession and not necessarily doing that with like my personal life, like having a pretty strict, very straight, like good, strong boundary in my personal life because I don't want to burn out. And I've done that before and it's not fun. These roles that we have, that society kind of forces onto women. I don't know how else to put it.
No, I mean, I don't.
Yeah, I would say so.
Sugarcoat it.
Yeah, I was like, I could say that we choose, but no, we don't because it's put on us. It's so subtle that by the time that we're practicing it, we don't even realize that it was put on our luggage, like you said, luggage. It's like all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's who I am. So, going back to the question of like looking ourselves in the mirror and going like, who is that person? I mean, that's what happens. You have children and, you start doing the caregiving because that's what you do as a mom, but then you kind of find yourself doing most of it. And there's a lot of negotiating. Hopefully you have a partner that's understanding and that, starts to carry some of the load. But even when they're understanding, because I have a very understanding partner, there still was a lot of pushing and a lot of like renegotiating and, arguing just to get them to take more of the load because they're not taught that that's something they're supposed to do.
Right. Because they've been conditioned as well. And so it's normal. We've talked about this before on the podcast, but I have this ongoing struggle not wanting to cook dinner every night just because I'm the woman. And so I had, this conversation with my fiance and it's like, look, can you please just, and he's really good about it. He just needs the reminders, but it's like, I want it to be natural. I want him to just be like, oh, okay, I'm just going to make dinner tonight, but we're working on it.
And when you mentioned the reminders, my husband's the same way. What I think is hilarious is like, why do I have to remind you that you have to eat? Like, don't you know that you have to eat? Like, why do I have to remind you that you need to do clothes? Don't you need clean clothes? Like, isn't that enough for a reminder? But yeah.
What would they do without her?
Drown.
Yeah.
I always tease my husband, and we talked about this on the Valentine's episode, and I say, if you hadn't met me, you would literally be living in some like piece of crap flat in like Bognor Regis, England, next to a nightclub, listening to people barf in the alleys. And he's like, that's fair.
That's funny. No, I mean, he didn't even fight it.
I often ask like mine too, like what would you do? Would you be like dead if I didn't exist? Like how would you survive? Like if you don't know to make food.
And also though, think about that. Like we laugh about it, but it's like that is so much pressure for us and so much work for us because not only do we do it with our partners, we do it with our children. And now guess what? We are in the smushed panini generation, that sandwich generation. So we're now doing it with our parents and it's freaking exhausting.
Yeah, it is. It's very exhausting. And that's why I always tell people that you cannot help without, if you're empty, like you need to have that full cup before you can pour to other people. So like you need to make sure that you carve out time for yourself.
It's like a riptide, I mean, I remember going, oh, well, I'll help him with X, Y, and Z because he's struggling with this. Now it's fine. I did not sign up to grab on to the current and be 500 miles offshore doing the same thing and waking up and going, wait, when did this become my job? I was just like helping you through a rough patch here.
Yeah. And that's how quickly it goes from like not like us helping to becoming our issue. And I mean, and stuff like that can, I was talking about dysregulation, but stuff like that can really dysregulate us because we're not taking care of ourselves. We're putting so much energy on something else or someone else that we're not taking the time to really care for our needs. And when our basic needs are not cared for, like it's super easy to get dysregulated when our basic needs are not cared for. One of the first things that I do when I work with people is I actually check on their daily activities. I'm like, what time do you wake up? What do you do when you wake up? When do you eat breakfast? Do you eat lunch? How many cups of coffee do you drink? Like things like that. Because if they're not eating and they're not sleeping well, if they're not, doing these basic things, it's going to be really hard for them to do more deep work. So those things are important.
And I think too, like it's so nice now. I think because we talk about these things, and that's one of the things we love to do on this podcast is like bring things to the light that we have been taught we shouldn't talk about, like trauma or asking for help or things like that. Like I didn't even know I was out of alignment. Like I didn't know I wasn't self-regulating. I thought something was wrong with me. It's like, why I should be able to do all this. I should be able to keep all these balls in the air. And especially now that I'm getting older, like when I was younger, I felt like I could do it all. And now I'm like, I really can't. And so I thought something was wrong with me. And come to find out, no, it's not normal to do all the freaking things.
Yeah. And honestly, I think that that comes down to like our capitalist society that has this high value on over productivity, honestly, because it's over productivity. It's not productivity. It's, we're supposed to be constantly doing. And no, we're not. Like, that's not how we evolved. That's not how our nervous system works. Rest is actually incredibly important. And when the reason why we're able to do more stuff when we were younger, it was because we also had less stuff that we were carrying.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
And so as we get older, we're carrying more stuff. And also we're not meant to do that. So we're carrying more stuff and we're trying to function the same way. It just doesn't add up.
So well, can you talk to that woman right now though? Because I feel like we have a lot of women exactly like that listening to this podcast. Yeah. Can you let them know like if they're listening to this and they're nodding their head and they're like, oh my gosh, yes, that's me. What are some steps that they can take? Because it's, you can't just like wake up and be a different person because we are literally unhooking from, decades of, this conditioning. So what are some tips or what are some strategies or tools that they can do to kind of, get out of this overproductivity mode?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It's first of all, I think you need to start questioning your surroundings and get curious and really ask yourself, like, am I where I want to be? Like, is this the life that I want for myself? Because if we don't start to get curious, then we're not going to be able to enact any sort of change. So really asking ourselves, like, is this what I want? Right. And being open to trying different things. Because I mean, there's no one, I don't want to say that there's this one path that you have to take to get better from trauma or to better your life in general, because I believe everybody is different and they might resonate with certain different kinds of treatment or just lifestyles. So, but really asking and being honest with yourself if this is really what you want. And if the answer is no, then, really being brave and taking different steps, because you're not going to get better by doing the same things. You're really going to have to step outside that box that you've been living in and doing things differently. And that takes courage, and it can be also really scary, but you also don't have to do it alone. There's therapists, there's body workers, there's, so many priests. I mean, you can go in any direction that you think fits you. And even in therapy, we have many different kinds of therapy that help people through these difficult things. There's not just one type. So I think it's mostly just being honest with yourself and being Like, is this where I want to be? And just getting curious and exploring. And once again, asking those questions and being brave enough to take those steps.
So I feel like I want to ask this question now. I was going to ask it later, but you and I have talked about this idea of generational trauma, right? Like trauma that's inherited, right? So, and what I mean by that is not like trauma that you specifically witnessed. It's literally like trauma that has been basically embedded in our DNA. And it's a very new field. There's not, as much known about it. But I remember you and I talking about that and me being like, holy crap, like that is crazy. And it explains so much. Can you talk a little bit about that? The difference between, like, for lack of a better word, like present trauma and what that concept is?
So intergenerational trauma, I mean, they've done a lot of studies. Like, I'm going to mention one, which I think answers your question. There was a study done with the grandchildren of survivors of the Holocaust, right? So the grandchildren were never, part of the Holocaust. They had no experiences with that whatsoever, but they exhibited a lot of the symptoms of PTSD, even though, their grandparents, not even their parents, were the ones that were in the Holocaust. And how did that show? Well, like, they looked into their lives and they didn't have any big T's, or maybe a couple little T's, but nothing that would, like, really, account for the kind of reactions that they were having and the kind of symptoms that they were having. So what happens is that, they realize, like, oh, this isn't even their stuff. This is like the grandparents. So if you look at women, so we women, we have our little eggs, right? Did you know that our little eggs have little eggs inside of their little eggs? So let's say, like, I don't know, I was in a terrible accident, or, something horrible happens to me. And I still didn't have kids, right? But let's say that little egg, like my daughter, she has the little eggs, of future generations. And all of those little eggs were impacted by what happened to me. Like, our DNA actually gets changed, and it's an evolutionary, like, adaptive mechanism. Because if you think about it, like, you want that future little egg to know that, to be careful with that train or whatever caused my accident, right? So it was done, evolutionary to protect us, but it can also, like, cause us harm, especially if that threat is no longer there.
So is that, it's, sorry to interrupt, but I just want to make sure I understand. So were you saying that specific type of trauma is really only from people that were born biologically female? People that were born male? Okay, so explain that.
But what I'm saying is that it is a woman we're already carrying, like the next generation and the next generation. So we're carrying like 2 generations. But no, it can be either male or female. But obviously with female, because of that X chromosome, it can be perpetuated a little bit more. So, but going back to the trauma, just how we also, I guess, pass down the trauma, we can also pass down resilience. So I also wanted to bring that up, because resilience is also very, very important as the other piece of trauma. So the way that I see resilience is like, okay, so you had something bad happen to you, but you survived it. That's resilience, right? And we need to always remember that when there's that bad thing, there's always that good thing that brought us out of that. And because we're here, right? So just how we can inherit trauma, we can also inherit resilience. And it's passed down to both male and female. And there's more studies being done on it, and so we're learning more.
Hey there, I'm Lisa Corachella McDowell, your midlife Pacific Northwest princess, here to guide you in the art of next leveling your life. I'm passionate about women's health and wellness in midlife, especially for moms parenting kids with unique needs like I do. I truly believe we can learn, grow, advocate, and care for the planet while taking care of ourselves and our families. And I'd love to help you do the same. And I'm beyond excited to tell you about my membership for maxed out mamas just like me, the Empowered Parent Collective. It's a space for parents to confidently advocate for their kids, build inclusive communities, educate themselves, and find balance and support along the way. To find out more about the Empowered Parent Collective, my classes, wellness offerings, parenting tips, advocacy resources, and exclusive Drinks with the Girls goodies, head to nextlevellifewithlisa.com. Let's survive and thrive in the messy middle together.
Trauma can have serious effects on our brain and our brain chemistry, especially when you experience it in a very early age, when your brain is a little bit more neuroplastic. Although I do want to say our brain is always neuroplastic until we die, which is good news, because just how things can get bad, things can get better. And that's why we can heal, right? So it's just it's a delicate little play between like the trauma traits or trauma symptoms that you can get, but also the resiliency.
I want to kind of go back a little bit to what we were talking about earlier when Lisa was asking about the different identities or the different roles. What are some survival strategies that kids develop when they're younger and they go through big T, little t, they develop survival strategies or like these inherited beliefs that we carry with us, throughout our life? Can you give some examples of some of those and how they might show up for adult women?
Yeah. So with little kids, you have to look at it this way. They are not strong. They're not powerful. They're usually on the powerless side. So, and small. So they have limited survival, I guess, options, right? Like we talked about dissociation. That's a big one for children, but also appeasing. And that's actually one of the later, I guess the newest form of survival response is appeasing or people pleasing, and that's a big one too with kids, because most kids can't fight or run away from the person that's hurting them. So those are the two main ones that I constantly see. And and it can look different for different people, like the people pleaser that always makes sure everybody has what they need, or, that always works really hard above and beyond, but at the core, it's just making sure that they avoid conflict and they try to appease whoever they perceive as, quote unquote, danger. And dissociating, I mean, people really not being present in their lives, not paying attention, a lot of daydreaming, avoiding situations is also one that happens a lot. And trying, really hard to not go there, or, just not participating, I guess, how they should be in their lives, because that there's that fear. So those are the two main ones that like I see. And like I said, looks different for different people. That kind of stems from that helplessness of being a child when you get a lot of those big traumas.
I'm just thinking of someone that is kind of at the beginning of this continuum, maybe like someone that is not really had a lot of experience with understanding trauma, or even if they have trauma. So okay, you realize, yeah, I probably have some trauma. Like, what next? You're realizing that, oh, okay, the reason that I have no boundaries is because my parents trampled on them all the time.
Yeah.
Just saying that for a friend. And so, wow, okay. So then what, please?
So I would say, so trauma, first of all, is stored in our bodies. So talk therapy helps, but if you really want to process your trauma, you need to do some sort of like body somatic, something that will get that trauma out of your body. So I would start by asking myself, do I have any physical like ailments, anything that's like a lot of, let's see, like autoimmune diseases tend to be trauma related. Things like fibromyalgia have been tied to trauma. Any sort of like stomach digestion issues are tied to trauma. So I would start by at least getting a checkup and trying to figure out if there's any sort of physical stuff happening with me. Like I would start exploring the different kind of therapies out there. Like I said, trauma is stored in our body. So the only way that you will get it out is if you address that. And there's really good treatments out there with like EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is an amazing treatment, somatic therapy, which is something I'm studying right now. And that helps you. What somatic does is it helps you finish the trauma response, because a lot of us don't finish it. So it gets stuck in our bodies and we keep repeating the pattern over and over and over and over again because we didn't ended. So somatic therapy focuses on that and helps you like kind of finish that. I mean, talk therapy helps too, but I would say if you're going to go through the therapy and talk therapy route, make sure that your therapist is very well versed on how trauma works and how it gets stored in the body, and that there's someone that's going to at least create space for you to feel those things and not just talk about them. Because if you're just going to talk about your trauma, nothing's going to change. You need to feel it in order for it to process and for your brain to make those connections. Because when a traumatic situation happens to you, your brain literally disconnects from your body. So that's why it gets stored in the body. And so when you're trying to process it, you need to connect the brain and the body to help it process. So you need to do your homework and really find someone that works for you, and also someone that you can feel safe with and that you relate with. Because if you don't, you're not going to get very far.
Okay, quick pause. Have we talked about the Pod Squad lately?
Oh, the Pod Squad. You mean our email list /VIP lounge /digital wine club?
Exactly. So listeners, if you're not on it yet, you're basically making life harder for yourself when it comes to podcasts.
Like trying to scroll for show notes while speed walking on a treadmill. Wait, what was that link again? Oh, no. Grab the side rails.
Or pulling up that book we mentioned while you're in the Starbucks line and then realizing everybody else moved up 3 cars and now you're that woman.
We've all been there. That's why we made the Pod Squad. You'll get new episode alerts every week with direct links. Easy to listen, easy to share.
And show notes straight to your inbox. So when we drop a life-changing product, book, hot tip, or yummy new drink, you're not rummaging through your memory like a woman searching for her reading glasses when they're on top of her head.
It's organized, it's helpful, it's for you, babes.
So join the Pod Squad. The link is in the show notes. Just tap it.
Snacks, sarcasm, solidarity,
and obviously fighting the patriarchy.
We write at dawn.
Can you give our listeners not some hope, but some...
No hope.
Because I'm hearing you talk. I mean, yes, we need to give them hope, but also like I'm hearing you talk and I'm thinking, well, that sounds really painful. And that sounds really hard going back and working through that. And also I know it's important because those things keep us stuck and stagnant in our life. And like you said earlier, you have to ask yourself, am I where I want to be? Is this okay with me? So what does it look like on the other side, I guess is my question. When a woman comes to you, she starts dealing with some of this, and how does her life change for the better after like processing these things?
The first thing that came to mind was like a good night's sleep. but
Hallelujah.
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, I would say, choose the person that you're going to work with wisely. Like, ask a lot of questions. It's okay to ask questions. I would never, ever start somebody like that I have with trauma, like, tell me what happened and let's process that the first day. We work up to it. We want to create a bigger container, a bigger capacity for that person first. Because if you come in and your capacity is like, I don't know, an inch long, that's how small it is. You're not going to be able to hold your trauma and like feel it, because it's going to feel like you're dying. So I'm going to create a bigger container for yourself, something that's like, I don't know, a couple of feet wide, so that you can actually sit with it and not freak out and run away, so that you can sit with it and actually process it. So a good therapist will do that. You're not going to jump in right away. So I guess I want to say to the person, like, if that therapist wants to work on your trauma right away, then you fire them and you get somebody else to do it, because that's not how it's supposed to be. I've seen people that I've done just like tiny little like glimpses of somatic work with them, very tiny little small ones. I haven't even touched their trauma yet, but just enough to help them regulate. And they were able to sleep, and they were able to feel calm when they walked in. And I mean, they were literally vibrating as soon as they sat on my couch. Like I could probably touch their energy. They were that like, intense. And then I was like, okay, let's do this little exercise. We did it. And they just looked at me like kind of shocked, like, what did you just do? And I was like, well, I just kind of helped you go in and out of this, where you were at, to just kind of help your nervous system regulate. And they're like, I just feel calm and I feel relaxed. I'm like, I feel like I can take a nap. And I'm like, well, take a nap. you know? So there is light at the end of the tunnel. There's definitely light, and it's a bright light and you can access it. But you also have to be patient with yourself. Like, you didn't get here from one day to another. You're not going to get there from one day to another either. You know, you have to be, like I said, loving and gentle towards yourself, and you have to give yourself space to make those changes, and not be afraid, once again, to ask for help. Like, none of us can do this by ourselves. We're social beings. We need other people. We cannot do this on our own.
So for somebody who maybe is not sure about therapy right now, or they're not sure about working with a professional to work through this, are there certain nervous system regulation tools that they could do on their own that could help them, at least like with the daily feelings, whatever it is that they're, whatever it is that they're going through?
Yeah.
Or is it therapy or nothing?
No, I mean, they can definitely do little things. Walking outside, walking in nature, that's super therapeutic. I highly recommend it. Any sort of physical activity, honestly, is good. But if all you have time for is like a 15-minute walk outside in the sun, preferably in the sun, because you want to get that sunshine, that's good enough. Honestly, that's good enough. I know that therapy is not necessarily accessible for a lot of folks, but I do want to say that, you know, we can always talk to people around us. They might not be able to give us the same kind of like advice or support that a therapist does. But like I said before, like, we're social beings. We need other people. We need those connections. Some people feel that connection with God and like to go to church. That works too, as long as you're connecting with somebody else. Because if you want to get out of the trauma, you need to connect with somebody else. Because we actually regulate best when we are co-regulating with other people. And some of the things that I do with folks is actually teach them that by co-regulating with them. So that's how we learn best. That's how we should have learned, or learned as babies. So that's a good way to start. But even, like I said, just going outside, some physical activity, those are things that will make us feel better. Eating your meals, believe it or not, having breakfast, lunch, and dinner, like, can help you be more present and can make it so that your nervous system is not feeling like it's in danger. Because when you skip a meal, your body thinks you're starving it. And so any single little thing will set it off. So just having your regular meals, like, I've had people's nervous system regulate like a good chunk just by them having their 3 regular meals and a couple snacks a day, because they're not starving and their body is not like freaking out every 2 seconds. Caffeine intake, I would say stop drinking caffeine afternoon, like, because you want to get a good night's sleep. A good night's sleep, and by that I mean like you fall asleep and you kind of stay asleep for at least, I don't know, 6 to 8 hours at least, can also really improve our like emotional regulation and our mood, etc. So there's a lot of little things like that that you can do that doesn't require, like, going to therapy. But like I mentioned before, if you want to process that trauma, you are going to need some guidance. And therapists we're one branch, but there's also body workers. There's other folks out there that do, like, spiritual guides, whatever, you like, that can help you through it. But I will say this, and I hate having to say it, because I know a lot of people don't like it, but you do have to feel it. You have to go through it if you want to get out the other end. There's no shortcut.
But I think the difference is a trained professional can help you safely feel and process it. And that's the issue. Like, one of the big problems my husband had is this therapist doing EMDR with him and was like opening him up to all this like trauma, and was not doing a very good job. And you know this, Alex, we talked about this, was not sewing him back up afterwards. Yeah. And he had a major episode, which I won't really get into the details on, but that's what triggered it. Yeah. So it's not like you can just like open up this can of worms and just say, here we go, right? It needs to be someone that leads you through it safely, because you're almost, the way I kind of, at least I've experienced it, is you're almost being taught to reassociate in a way that serves you better.
Yeah. 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 And I think that's why, I always tell people to ask a lot of questions if they are going to go the therapy route. Don't feel bad that you're asking too many questions, because first of all, if it's a therapist that is, professional, knows what they're doing, they're going to welcome the questions. I've never been offended because people ask me too many questions. If anything, I enjoy it. So I like to explain what I'm doing. And I mean, they're working on you. You need to know what's happening. And like EMDR, like that, it's a great and powerful modality, and I've seen it do some amazing things. But yes, like you said, Lisa, if they don't close you up, you're sending someone out there like raw, so the person needs to know, like the therapist needs to do a really good job of closing that person up before they send them.
It's almost re-traumatizing, or is that too strong?
Yeah, no, it can definitely be re-traumatizing. That's why you have to be really careful, and you have to make sure that you create that container first for the client so that they have the capacity to hold that.
Yep.
Because if you do it when their container is like really tiny, they're not going to be able to hold these big traumas, which is why they're traumatized to begin with.
Right.
So you need to create a bigger capacity so they're able to relive that with more tools and, more knowledge and the capacity to heal. There is hope. I guess that's what I wanted to just make sure that there is hope.
Yeah. We like to end all of our episodes with takeaways so our listeners can walk away with 1, 2, 3, actionable things, or maybe an aha moment. So, Alex, what are a couple of things that you really want to make sure that our listeners walk away from this episode with?
Yeah, that there's people out there that really care about, about you and helping you through this, and that are not going to shame you or not going to make you feel bad because of what you've lived. And it's, they're out there. You just have to find them. Like I love my job. Like I really love my job. And it's something that I chose to do because yes, I have my own trauma and I've worked through my trauma. And when I learned that people could heal, not only did it become my goal, but it was something that I wanted to make sure that I could bring to other people. So there's a lot of us out there that are very passionate about what we do. And, we want to see people get better because it's just beautiful to see that. It really is. So there is help out there. And, don't ever be afraid to ask questions, be curious, because actually part of our healing is in that curiosity. And it's okay to let go of things that no longer serve us. I know it's scary to learn new things and to try different things, but you never know what you're going to find. And I don't know, I've always been pleasantly surprised with everything that I found.
And I think, I think you'll agree with this. You opening your own practice was a way for you to like honor your own trauma and set your own boundaries and make this space good for you, because you saw that, you were seeing, I remember talking to you, you were like, I'm seeing way too many clients, like the boundaries are getting softer. And there's a lot of reasons why you did this, but I think that was a big motivator. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but.
Yeah, it was. And also, creating a space that was very intentional, because I wanted, like the way, I mean, you saw my office, the way I decorate everything, I put a lot of thought into it, because I was like, if it doesn't feel safe for me, it's not going to feel safe for my client. And I want them to come in here, feel safe, feel cozy, like I'm giving them a big giant hug. So that's what I created, because I mean, I had a really nice office before where I worked at a group practice, but it wasn't me. And for me, I know other therapists do a really good job of separating themselves from their clients. I can't do that. Like I bring myself into the room because it's hard for me to separate who I am from what I'm doing. And I've seen it create really good relationships. Like my approach create really good relationships with clients. And I've seen people heal from some pretty big stuff. And I think that has a lot to do with how I approach it. So, definitely if you are going to go the therapy route, find somebody that you can relate with and whose approach really speaks to you.
What would you say is the best way to go about finding a therapist?
People always ask me that.
It's
I would
hard
say
these days. It's
it
getting
is.
harder
It
to find
is.
someone that ticks all the
Yeah,
boxes and the insurance and blah, 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 blah,
I know. I know. So I would say always ask for a free consult. Most of us have them, like at least 15 minutes. I always do like 30, even though I say it's 15, I always do 30. And get to know your therapist, ask a lot of questions, and if you like them and that person has a wait list or they can't see you right away or they don't have your right insurance, ask them for help. Because I've had people ask me for help and I'll be like, hold on, I'm going to put a little note out there because we have our own little, networks that we can put out a little feeler out and see if we can find somebody for you. It might be a hit or miss, but it's good to ask. It never hurts. But like I said, ask questions and be intentional about what you want to ask. Like sit down and write some questions down so that you can check that person out and if possible, feel the person out too. Not just listen to what they're saying, but feel them out. Because we have an amazing nervous system that is constantly giving us cue as to what feels safe and what doesn't. And that can really help us find somebody that's going to fit with us.
Yeah, I personally think the Psychology Today website is really good for getting just people that you feel like, that it'll tell you like what insurance they take. It'll tell you what modalities they use, like what their training is, what their specialty is. And I remember when I was looking for my current therapist, I got some advice from someone. I was like, oh yeah, there's wait lists. And she was like, no, 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 no. That's a good thing. Number one, don't be afraid because
Yeah.
a wait list doesn't mean like no. And she said also, it means they're good. And I was like, oh my gosh, I never thought about it. And I did. I got on this one that is my therapist now. I got on her wait list and it was maybe like a month, right?
Yeah.
Wait.
Yeah.
And guess what? She's good.
Yeah. Yeah. Wait list. I mean, I always tell people like you might be in here for like a couple months, but like I don't like to have people for too long on the wait list. If I know it's going to be more than a couple months, I tell people like, you know what, I don't think I can, see you because it's probably going to be more than like 6 months. But sometimes people are even okay with that. So I mean, don't feel like you can't ask those questions. Like, go ahead.
I think also, and this is, kind of touchy because not everybody wants to admit that they're looking for help. But I know I got some of my best professionals, therapists, when I just asked people, friends and people that I knew for a personal referral.
Yeah.
But yeah, not everybody wants to like broadcast it that they're looking for somebody necessarily. But, I love what you said about, just ask all the questions and be discerning. Like it's okay if you meet with somebody and it's not a fit. Like you don't vibe. It's okay because
Yeah.
you want to vibe with the person. Like you want to feel
Yes.
safe with them. You want to feel like they can help you. And
Yeah.
if you have weird what feelings, listen to that. Right.
Yeah, it's important that you listen to that because if you're gonna heal, you need that space to do it and that person to do it. If you're not vibing with them, if you're not feeling safe, there's not going to be room for that healing. I also tell people give it at least a couple of months, like 3 months. You might feel a little guarded, so it's hard for you to really sense the situation when you're guarded. So give it a couple months just to kind of get to know that, at least 3. But after 3 months, if you're like, okay, I'm not really vibing with the person, okay, then you can even ask them like, hey, can you help me find somebody else? Like I tell people I don't hold you hostage. If you don't want to work with me, like that's totally fine. And I don't mind helping people find somebody else.
Thank you so much, Alex. This was such a great conversation. I'm walking away with new things and new ahas myself, and I know the listeners are as well. And I think, we try really hard here at this podcast to help women feel supported and feel like they're not alone. And, this is a touchy subject. It's one of our heavier ones. And I just appreciate you coming and helping us just recognize that we're human and these are human things and we all deal with it on some level.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah.
You're welcome. I love talking, so this wasn't hard.
I keep trying to convince her to be my therapist. She's like, no, unethical.
Because I know you. It's not
That's right. You're my friend. No.
She's like, no,
Yeah.
doesn't work. So I'm lucky I get to have her as my friend. So listeners, I talked about this in the last episode, but life goal, y'all sending us questions and us doing an episode about questions. To me, like this topic is perfect for that, right? Like we would love to have Alex back if that's something you're interested in doing. So please like reach out with questions. We will put Alex's contact information in there. I know you do telehealth, but you're also pretty full up with clients, but I'm sure that if you reach out to Alex and, want some of the resources, I'm sure she'd provide them for you. I will put some of the links in the show notes, Psychology Today, that kind of thing. Karen, anything else you want to add?
Nope. Just like and share and give us that 5-star review.
Just saying. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Alex, you're amazing. We love you. And I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their day, whatever you're doing. And I will say cheers.
Cheers. Bye.